Is this YouTube? Oh man. Could this be the Gold Coast Aquarium Society?
I believe it is.
Oh my god. Is this our PA system? That's Pete.
That's the announcer.
All right, everybody, here we go. Welcome.
One more thing. Rachel Marcus. Her husband is a metal fabricator. And this is not a fish. This is pure art. And we're going to auction this off a little bit later today. So check this out on the table up front here as you come by. It's a beautiful piece that I wanted. So
don't ask me what kind of fish it is. I give my husband an artistic license.
Hardmoricus metallicus.
There you go.
something with a nut in it. But anyway.
It's great.
Rachel.
Thank you. So if you guys don't know me, I'm Rachel O'Leary, and I live in a very rural area in Pennsylvania where I have anywhere at any time from 50 to 120 aquariums running in my basement fish room. I have a greenhouse, and then I have 18 yard tubs ranging from about 40 to 300 gallons, and I maintain a ton of plants, a ton of fish. And for the past about 18 years or so, my focus has been primarily on fish under 2 inches, as well as freshwater invertebrates. In my journey with this hobby, I've spent a lot of time at clubs and events where I have been summarily made fun of for raising feeders, and it's been a real joy to watch this aspect of the hobby evolve over the past decade in particular. And this presentation and most of my presentations are a direct result of being made fun of by all the men in the hospitality suite. So this talk is about nano aquaria, some of the unique obstacles of maintenance, of stocking, of scaping, compatibility, and what I think the philosophy of setting up a nano aquarium should be. So I lost my glasses, I can't find my clicker, and I have no idea where in Florida I am. So, forgive me. So there's some unique challenges that come alongside having a nano aquarium. When you use the definition of nano aquarium as an aquarium 10 gallons or smaller, inherently little aquariums have a very little volume of water, so any change of any of the chemistry within the aquarium makes for it to be a significant one, which can be detrimental to the stability of the tank as well as the health of the livestock. It can be really difficult to properly maintain a small aquarium because in order to clean it adequately, you end up almost draining it completely. So there's some tips and tricks that we'll go over that will help with that. Filtration, in a small tank, there's not a lot of room to over-filter like you would in a larger aquarium, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And I think one of us, or all of us who love our creatures as much as we do, tend to really overfeed. And that, of course, is a huge problem in a very small aquarium. Plus, some of these guys have very particular dietary needs, as well as, the unique obstacles of finding food that's physically small enough. So this is a very old picture of a kit tank that I had. And I think most people, when they start out with nano aquariums, tend to start out with these kit tanks because they're really affordable. And they're great, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they do have some unique obstacles. Often they have the built-in filtration. This is the Flugel 5-gallon Spec, which has the chamber off to the side. There's foam, there's a pump that runs it through, and it's great. One thing to take into consideration with a lot of the built-in filtrations, especially if you're going to be keeping invertebrates, is that they're not necessarily made for invertebrates. They're made for small fish. So most fry of small fish and certainly baby shrimp can be sucked right in through that filter compartment. So often it takes some modification if your goal is to have an ever-expanding colony. Some of them, they've gotten a lot better in the past few years. Some of them have really strange lids and access points for actually being able to maintain or escape the tank. There's like a Flugel Chi, I think, or something that has like this little tiny square opening, and to me that just makes no sense, so I would not recommend that. And again, when you have a small aquarium, it can often be really difficult to find really attractive hardscape or plants that are small enough to actually suit the scale and not outgrow the aquarium. So when you're choosing your hardscape, especially in a small aquarium, you have to be really aware of a few things. if you're using stone, you need to know if your stone is inert or not. Is this going to increase the hardness? Is this going to buffer the water? Is there anything like that happening? Things like Cereus stone, the landscaping rock on the bottom right, is not inert. If you use that in a larger volume aquarium, you'll see a nominal shift of hardness. If you put it in a 5-gallon aquarium, you're going to have parameters that are fluctuating constantly, which for some things is fine, but for shrimp it's definitely not. So you may want to go more on the side of choosing something like an Oko stone or a river stone or something that you know is inert that isn't going to affect that chemistry. Now, I'm not sure what the water is like here. Where I live, oh, it's liquid rock? Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
Then you guys probably don't have to worry about it unless you're using RO water. Where I live, I have a TDS of less than 100 out of the well. So if I add something like Cereus, you know, it goes poorly. I like to use a lot of driftwoods. I like to use a lot of natural, botanical. We went cherry shrimp for $25 a piece. It was very interesting at the time. Nobody knew anything. They didn't know how they bred. They didn't know what they could be kept with. They didn't know, there weren't other color forms available, at least in this country. Shortly after Crystal Reds came, I think in about 2004, and then it's just blown up. And I think that's really awesome, but I think there's a few things that we need to talk about with that. Shrimp are generally very particular about water chemistry. It's not like that myth with fish that like they can't, like wild fish can't adjust to water. You guys live here, you know that the vast majority of fish can adapt over time. Maybe they won't breed as much, maybe the hatch rate is lower on their eggs, but the vast majority of them will absolutely do all right going into your harder water. Now, the vast majority of the shrimp that we keep all behave in this way, but this is again why I say you need to be really careful if you're using power filtration of covering your intakes. That is a frond of Java moss on the bottom right-hand side and a newly hatched cherry shrimp. You can see how very tiny they are. Now, these guys don't predate on their babies at all, which makes them super rewarding. I actually wrote a magazine article for Amazonas magazine that was about being a feeder breeder and raising shrimp, not just for the glory and beauty of shrimp, but you can start out with 10, and if they're in their own aquarium with sponge filtration, you can have hundreds within a matter of months. And if you have an interest in other prey-driven small fish, you know, if you're working with like wild gourami or wild bettas or bottis or dario or pipefish or any number of the more prey-driven fish, these guys can be invaluable as a secondary food source for your aquarium. Unfortunately, over the past few years, shrimp disease has actually become a really big problem. And I'm really, really thankful that I met Dr. Thomas Walczak, who's, you guys may or may not know, I'm not sure. He's the head of virology at the University of Florida's fish lab. And I am having him currently sequence this disease. The preliminary results are in, which is really interesting. This is what we were calling ileobiopsis, which is completely wrong. It was the closest thing we could find at the time. It is actually a fungus that takes over all of the swimming legs of the shrimp, and then they actually latch into the body of the shrimp and start to go into the internal organs of the shrimp. Other diseases that they can get that are much easier to treat are Scutellaria japonica. You can see the adult worms attached here on the rostrum or the nose of the shrimp. You can see where I have eggs pointing out up there. These guys are motile. They'll move around on the shrimp, so it's a good excuse to never put your mouth on a siphon again. But if you watch these guys, I do a lot of macro photography and macro video. You'll see that the shrimp will molt and then the eggs hatch, and then these worms actually move all over the shrimp and then settle back there. It's really pretty disturbing. Now with the Asian Caridinus, these diseases, either they don't affect them or it's not occurring because these guys are generally raised indoors, and that's because they're substantially more expensive. Now most of these probably won't like your water that much. Some of the wild types, the tigers and bees may do all right, but a lot of the line-bred guys really like things much cooler and much softer than would be easy for most of you, I think, to provide. That doesn't mean they're not beautiful and interesting.
You know, what you like is what you like. What you want to do and learn and try is up to you. I prefer to keep everything separate so that I can maintain these species. And that's mainly because the vast majority of shrimp in the wild come from like mountaintop streams. They're along, you know, areas where they're primarily digging for gold or clear cutting to add to cattle or palm oil production. And I would say, and if you ask Dr. Loisel, he would tell you that all of these guys are critically threatened. Amano shrimp are, for anyone who has multiple aquariums or anyone who keeps aquarium plants, I feel are a shrimp that you should have, and arguably in their own aquarium, and I'll tell you why. These guys are amazing algae eaters. This is obviously blackbeard algae that infested a piece of wood, and this was, I think it was 3 days later at this point. Now, I must add some disclaimers here. I keep an Amano-only aquarium. It can have anywhere from 30 to 300 Amano shrimp in it. They are only fed the plants that need to be cleaned. If you add them to a display aquarium where you're feeding your fish, they're not going to eat the algae before they steal the fish food from all the fish. Assassin snails I like to talk about simply because they gained a ton of popularity. This is the snail-eating snail, of course. For a while there, Eric Hahnemann actually was saying that he thought that they were going to become on the banned list, but as far as I know, it's never happened. These guys are really efficient at eating the pest snails, the little ram's horns, the trumpet snails. Well, this is one of my bee shrimp aquariums, and it's just an example of how I utilize those botanicals. And I know it sounds really stupid to pay $3 for like a pod, but where I live, I don't have access to all these things. Down here, you guys probably have all sorts of neat stuff, but I really love these big pods. They last for years and years and years. They don't break down particularly quickly, but they will develop that biofilm that's really useful for the fish and the shrimp and the snails to graze on. You can use a feeding dish or really just feed less. Fertilizers we didn't even talk about. If you're using them, you really need to put them up with your water changes. Knowing your water, you guys all seem really well aware of your water down here. Just know what you can provide for these critters. Cover your intakes with a pre-filter. And most importantly, you know, if you're interested in breeding shrimp, keep a shrimp tank. I promise you, you won't regret it. They are so fun. Their numbers will increase. When there aren't fish in the tank, they're always visible. They're always climbing around. They're always doing silly, shrimpy things that just will really, really provide a lot of enrichment. If your concern is having a combination of creatures where you see adult shrimp and you see a lot of small fish, you can certainly combine them. You just need to be aware that your population is going to grow likely pretty slowly, if at all. So, you know, figure out what your priorities are. Seems pretty easy, right? And the one thing I also forgot to mention is that shrimp in particular are absolutely intolerant of swings of ammonia or nitrite. Small aquariums, as I mentioned, with that low volume will frequently have pretty dramatic shifts in the beginning. I don't know how, I'm sure a lot of you use polyfilter, the media that is it's most often used in salt water that absorbs and adsorbs ammonia. My favorite tip for people keeping small aquariums is to purchase polyfilter. And when you're starting in your aquarium, you can put like a fingernail-sized piece of polyfilter in that aquarium, and it'll turn yellow before your test kits can pick up ammonia. And then that way you can keep on top of those water changes and make sure that you're not having any deadly spikes within your aquarium. So on that note, I think that you are finally all done listening to me talk unless you have questions. None?